The town of Willow Creek was the kind of place where everyone knew each other's names. It was quiet, safe, and surrounded by thick forests that turned golden in the fall. People rarely locked their doors, and children played freely in the streets until the sun dipped below the horizon. 12-year-old Emily Carter was one of those children. With her curly brown hair, bright green eyes, and an ever-present sketchbook tucked under her arm, she was a beloved figure in the community. She loved drawing, trees, animals, her friends, and often spent hours lost in her imagination. On a crisp autumn afternoon, Emily left school like any other day. Her backpack was heavy with books and art supplies, but she didn't mind. As she walked down the sidewalk, she waved goodbye to her classmates who headed in different directions. The air smelled of fallen leaves, and the sky was painted orange and pink as the sun began its descent. Emily lived just a 15-minute walk from school, a route she had taken countless times before. But this time, something went terribly wrong. When Emily didn't come home by dinner, her mother, Sarah, started to worry. At first, she thought maybe Emily had stopped at a friend's house or lingered at the park to finish a drawing. But as the minutes ticked into hours, panic set in. Sarah called Emily's friends, teachers, and neighbors, but no one had seen her after school. By nightfall, the entire town was buzzing with concern. Search parties formed almost instantly, armed, with flashlights and determination. They combed through the woods, checked abandoned buildings, and even searched the riverbanks, fearing the worst. For days, the search continued. Flyers with Emily's smiling face were plastered on every lamppost and store window. Volunteers came, from neighboring towns, bringing trained dogs to sniff out clues. Helicopters circled overhead, scanning the dense forest canopy. Yet despite all efforts, there was no sign of Emily, not a single clue to explain what had happened to her. It was as if the earth itself had swallowed her whole. Sarah refused to give up hope. Every morning she joined the search teams, her voice hoarse from calling Emily's name. She clung to the belief that her daughter was still alive, perhaps lost or injured somewhere waiting to be found. Nights were the hardest. Alone in the silence of her home, Sarah replayed every moment of that day in her mind, searching for answers she couldn't find. Why hadn't she walked Emily home? Why hadn't she insisted she call when she arrived? These questions haunted her, keeping her awake long after the rest of the town had gone to bed. As weeks turned into months, the fervor of the search began to wane. Life in Willow Creek slowly returned to normal, though it was never quite the same. Parents held their children a little tighter, and the once familiar path between the school and Emily's house became a somber reminder of what had been lost. For Sarah, the pain only deepened. She couldn't move on, not while her daughter was still missing. Each birthday, each holiday, felt hollow without Emily there to share it. The unanswered questions gnawed at her, refusing to let her rest. But even in her darkest moments, Sarah vowed to keep looking. She promised herself and Emily that she would never stop fighting to bring her daughter home. Little did she know the answers she sought were closer than she imagined, hidden away in a place no one had thought to look. As the months stretched into years, life in Willow Creek began to change. The once vibrant posters of Emily's face faded under rain and sun, their edges curling and tearing until only a few remained. The town tried to move forward, but the shadow of her disappearance lingered like an unspoken ache. For Sarah Carter, time didn't heal wounds. It only deepened them. Each morning she woke with the same hollow feeling in her chest, the kind that no amount of coffee or routine could fill. At first, Sarah had thrown herself into the search for Emily with relentless energy. She attended every meeting with detectives, followed up on every tip no matter how small or unlikely. But as leads dried up and hope dwindled, the reality of her situation became harder to ignore. Friends and neighbors stopped asking about Emily, unsure of what to say. Some avoided Sarah altogether, unable to bear the weight of her grief. Even her husband, Mark, struggled to cope. Their arguments grew more frequent, fueled by frustration and helplessness. Eventually, he moved out, leaving Sarah alone in the house she had once shared with her family. Living alone was difficult, but Sarah found ways to keep busy. She filled her days with tasks, cleaning, gardening, volunteering at the local shelter. But None of it brought her peace. At night, when the world fell silent, her thoughts always returned to Emily. She imagined her daughter growing older, wondering if she still loved drawing, if she remembered the bedtime stories Sarah used to read, if she ever thought about home. On some nights, Sarah would sit by the window staring out at the road where Emily had last been seen. She whispered prayers into the darkness, hoping against hope that somewhere, somehow, her daughter could hear her. The anniversaries were the hardest. Every year on Emily's birthday, Sarah baked a cake just the way her daughter liked it. Chocolate, with rainbow sprinkles, and set a plate at the table. She lit candles and sang happy birthday, her voice cracking with emotion. Afterward, she'd sit alone, eating slices of cake until her stomach hurt. Christmas was equally painful. The tree stayed bare, its branches heavy with memories instead of ornaments. Sarah couldn't bring herself to wrap gifts or hang stockings, not when there was one empty chair at the table. Despite everything, Sarah refused to give up. She visited the police station regularly, though the officers rarely had anything new to share. Her persistence earned her a mix of admiration and pity from the townsfolk. Some called her brave, others whispered that she should let go and move on. But Sarah knew she couldn't. Giving up meant accepting that Emily was truly gone, and she wasn't ready to do that. Not yet. Over time, Sarah began to notice changes in herself. Her hair, once dark and shiny, now had streaks of gray. Lines creased her forehead and the corners of her eyes, etched there by sleepless nights and endless worry. Yet beneath the weariness, her determination burned brighter than ever. She started keeping a journal, writing letters to Emily as if she were still reading them. In those pages, Sarah poured out her heart, sharing stories of her day, her dreams, and her unwavering belief that they would be reunited someday. Though the rest of the town seemed to have forgotten Emily, Sarah made sure her daughter's memory stayed alive. She organized fundraisers to support missing children's organizations, using Emily's story to raise awareness. She spoke at schools about stranger danger and the importance of staying safe. These activities gave her purpose, a reason to keep going even when the weight of her loss threatened to crush her. Still, there were moments when despair threatened to overwhelm her. Late at night, lying awake in bed, Sarah wrestled with doubts. What if Emily was never found? What if she had suffered? The questions swirled endlessly, leaving her exhausted. But then, just as quickly, a spark of hope would ignite within her. Maybe tomorrow would bring answers. Maybe someone, somewhere, held the key to finding Emily. Until that day came, Sarah vowed to keep fighting, for her daughter, for herself, and for the future they might still share together. Years passed, and Sarah Carter's life settled into a rhythm of quiet despair. The world around her continued to move forward, but she remained stuck in the past, haunted by questions that had no answers. She spent most of her days tending to her garden or organizing community events about child safety, anything to keep her mind occupied. But despite her efforts, the pain of losing Emily never faded completely. It lingered like a shadow, always present, always waiting. One Saturday morning, Sarah decided to visit the local farmer's market. She didn't go often. It was too crowded, too noisy, but she needed fresh vegetables for dinner, and the market was the only place in town where they were sold. As she wandered between stalls filled with ripe tomatoes, fragrant herbs, and homemade jams, she overheard snippets of conversation from the people around her. Most were harmless exchanges about the weather or recipes, but one particular discussion caught her attention. A group of older women stood near a fruit stand, their voices low and urgent. They spoke in hushed tones, glancing nervously over their shoulders as if afraid of being overheard. Curious, Sarah slowed her pace and pretended to examine a basket of apples while listening intently. "Did you hear about Grady's barn?" one woman whispered, her voice trembling slightly. "They say there are strange lights coming from it at night." Another woman nodded solemnly. "My grandson swears he heard crying when he rode his bike past it last week. He said it sounded like a child." Sarah froze, the basket of apples forgotten in her hands. A chill ran down her spine as the words sank in. Grady's barn? Old man Grady lived on the outskirts of town, far from the main roads and prying eyes. His property had always been shrouded in mystery. Locals avoided it, claiming it was cursed or haunted. Sarah had never paid much attention to such stories before, dismissing them as superstition. But now, hearing whispers of strange lights and crying children, her heart began to race. Could it be possible? Could Emily somehow be connected to this? The thought seemed absurd even to her. 10 years had passed since her daughter's disappearance. Surely if Emily had been nearby all this time, someone would have noticed. And yet something about the rumors gnawed at her. Why would there be cries coming from an abandoned barn unless someone, or something, was trapped inside? That night, Sarah lay awake in bed staring at the ceiling as the whispers from the market replayed in her mind. She tried to rationalize them, telling herself they were just tall tales meant to scare gullible listeners. But the image of Grady's barn refused to leave her thoughts. What harm could come from investigating further? If nothing else, it might ease her restless mind. The next morning, Sarah drove to the library and spent hours poring over old newspaper clippings and town records. She learned that Grady had lived alone for decades, rarely interacting with his neighbors. People described him as odd, reclusive, and unfriendly. Some claimed he snapped at anyone who dared set foot on his land, warning them to stay away. Others mentioned sightings of strange vehicles coming and going from his property late at night, though no one could confirm what they carried, or whom. By the time Sarah left the library, her head was spinning with possibilities. Was Grady involved in Emily's disappearance? Or was she simply grasping at straws, desperate for any lead after so many years of silence? Either way, she knew she couldn't ignore the nagging feeling in her gut. Whether it was intuition or blind hope, Sarah felt certain that Grady's barn held answers, and she was determined to uncover them. As she drove home, the sun setting behind the trees, Sarah made up her mind. Tomorrow she would visit the barn herself. Whatever waited for her there, she was ready to face it. For Emily, she would do anything, even confront the unknown. The next morning, Sarah woke before sunrise, her heart pounding with a mix of fear and determination. She had spent the entire night tossing and turning, her mind replaying the rumors about Grady's barn and imagining every possible scenario. What if Emily really was there? What if she wasn't? The questions swirled endlessly. But one thing was clear. Sarah couldn't sit idly by any longer. Today, she would find out the truth. After pulling on her oldest pair of jeans and a sturdy jacket, Sarah packed a small bag with essentials, a flashlight, a bottle of water, matches, and her phone. She knew it might be foolish to go alone, but she couldn't risk waiting for help or bringing someone who might talk her out of it. This was her daughter, her responsibility, and no one else could understand the urgency burning inside her. As she drove toward the outskirts of town, the landscape shifted dramatically. The neat rows of houses gave way to sprawling fields and dense woods, their branches twisting like skeletal fingers against the gray sky. The road grew narrower and bumpier, forcing Sarah to slow down as she approached Grady's property. Finally, she spotted it in the distance, a weathered barn standing at the edge of a barren field. Its red paint faded to a dull rust color. It looked abandoned, yet something about it felt ominous, as though it were hiding secrets too dark to speak aloud. Sarah parked her car a short distance away, not wanting to draw attention. Her hands trembled as she gripped the steering wheel, taking deep breaths to steady herself. "You can do this," she whispered, more to convince herself than anything else. Grabbing her bag, she stepped out of the car and began walking toward the barn, each step feeling heavier than the last. The air was cold and still, broken only by the crunch of gravel beneath her boots. As she drew closer, Sarah noticed details she hadn't seen from afar: the sagging roof, the splintered wooden planks, the padlock hanging loosely from the main door. It seemed strange that such an old structure would have a lock at all. Why bother securing something so clearly neglected? Her stomach tightened with unease, but she pushed forward, unwilling to turn back now. Reaching the entrance, Sarah hesitated. She shone her flashlight around the area, searching for signs of life or danger. The silence was deafening, pressing down on her like a weight. Summoning her courage, she tugged at the padlock. To her surprise, it came loose easily, as though it hadn't been secured properly. Her pulse quickened. Was this a trap? Or had someone left it unlocked intentionally? With trembling hands, Sarah pushed open the heavy barn door. It groaned loudly, the sound echoing through the empty space like a cry. For a moment she froze, listening for any response. Nothing stirred. Taking another deep breath, she stepped inside, her flashlight beam cutting through the darkness. The interior was cluttered and musty, filled with forgotten tools, stacks of rotting hay and cobwebs clinging to the rafters. Dust particles floated lazily in the dim light, making it hard to see clearly. Every creak of the floorboards beneath her feet made her jump, her nerves stretched taut like piano strings. Yet despite her fear, Sarah pressed on, scanning every corner for clues. Then, something caught her eye. A faint glimmer of color peeking out from behind a pile of crates. Moving cautiously, she knelt down and pulled it free. It was a child's, drawing, crumpled and faded but unmistakable. A girl holding hands with a figure labeled Mommy stared back at her, the handwriting shaky but familiar. Sarah's breath hitched in her throat. It was Emily's work. There was no doubt about it. Her knees buckled and she sank to the ground, clutching the drawing to her chest. Tears streamed down her face as a wave of emotions crashed over her. Relief, anger, hope, despair. Emily had been here. She had to be nearby. Clutching her flashlight tightly, Sarah stood up, her resolve stronger than ever. If her daughter had left this behind, she might leave other traces too. And Sarah wouldn't stop until she found them all. With renewed determination, she called out softly into the shadows. "Emily? Are you here?" Her voice echoed eerily, swallowed by the vast emptiness of the barn. But Sarah didn't care. She was close, she could feel it. Whatever waited for her in the depths of this eerie place, she was ready to face it head-on. The sound of her own voice calling Emily's name echoed through the barn, bouncing off the walls and fading into silence. Sarah stood frozen for a moment, straining to hear any response. At first, there was nothing. Just the oppressive quiet that seemed to press against her ears. But then faintly, almost imperceptibly, she heard it. A soft shuffle, followed by a muffled whimper. Her heart leapt into her throat. "Emily!" she called again, louder this time, her voice trembling, with a mix of hope and fear. The noise came again, closer now, a weak, hesitant cry that sent chills racing down her spine. It wasn't an animal or the wind, it was human, and it was coming from somewhere deeper inside the barn. Sarah tightened her grip on the flashlight, its beam cutting through the gloom as she moved cautiously forward. The air smelled damp and earthy, thick with decay. Every step felt heavier, her boots sinking slightly into the dirt floor. Shadows danced unnaturally in the flickering light, making her pulse quicken. She told herself to focus, to listen, to look, to find the source of that sound. As she ventured further, she noticed something unusual tucked away in a shadowy corner. A pile of hay had been stacked haphazardly, almost deliberately, as if to hide something beneath it. Her instinct screamed at her to investigate. Dropping to her knees, she began pulling the hay aside, tossing it over her shoulder until her hands brushed against something solid. Her breath caught in her throat. Beneath the hay was a trapdoor, its wooden surface rough and splintered. It was partially concealed, but there was no mistaking what it was. An entrance to some hidden space below. Sarah's mind raced. Could Emily be down there? Was this why no one had found her all these years? She hesitated for only a moment before grabbing the iron ring attached to the door and pulling with all her strength. The hinges groaned in protest, releasing a cloud of dust that made her cough. As the door creaked open, a narrow staircase was revealed, descending into darkness. The smell wafting up was musty and stale, carrying hints of mildew and something else she couldn't quite place. Something metallic. Fear gripped her chest like a vice. What if someone was waiting down there? What if it wasn't safe? But Sarah pushed those thoughts aside. She had come this far. She couldn't turn back now. Summoning every ounce of courage, she took the first step downward, her flashlight trembling in her hand. Each stair creaked under her weight, amplifying the eerie stillness around her. At the bottom, she found herself in a cramped, low-ceilinged space that looked more like a dungeon than a basement. The walls were lined with rusted tools and chains, their presence sending a chill through her body. In one corner, there was a pile of old blankets, threadbare and stained. And then, tucked against the far wall, she saw it. A figure curled up tightly, shivering despite the heavy layers wrapped around them. "Emily?" Sarah whispered, her voice breaking. The figure stirred, lifting their head slowly. Their face was pale and gaunt, their eyes wide with confusion and recognition. "Mom?" came the faint, cracked reply. For a moment, Sarah thought she might collapse. Tears streamed down her face as she rushed forward, dropping to her knees beside her. "Daughter." It was Emily, older, thinner, and clearly traumatized, but alive. Alive. Sarah reached out, touching her cheek gently, half expecting her to vanish like a mirage. "It's me," Sarah choked out, pulling Emily into her arms. "I'm here. You're safe now." Emily clung to her, sobbing uncontrollably, her frail body trembling against Sarah's. For a long while, neither of them spoke. They simply held each other, two lost souls finally reunited after a decade apart. All the sleepless nights, the endless searches, the crushing despair, it all melted away in that moment. Emily was alive, and Sarah would never let her go again. But, even as relief washed over her, questions swirled in Sarah's mind. How had Emily survived here for so long? Who had done this to her? And where was the person responsible? As much as Sarah wanted to stay in this embrace forever, she knew they couldn't linger. They needed to get out, to safety, to freedom, to the life they had both been robbed of. With gentle urgency, Sarah helped Emily to her feet, supporting her as they made their way back up the stairs. One step at a time, they climbed toward the light, leaving the darkness behind. Whatever lay ahead, they would face it together. As Sarah guided Emily up the narrow staircase, her heart ached with every shaky step her daughter took. Emily was weak, her legs trembling beneath her as if they had forgotten how to carry her weight. 10 years of captivity had left their mark, her body frail, her movements hesitant, her eyes darting nervously around the barn as though expecting danger to leap out at any moment. But despite her fragility, there was a flicker of something in her expression. Hope. It was faint, fragile, but unmistakable. Reaching the top of the stairs, Sarah paused to catch her breath, wrapping an arm firmly around Emily's shoulders. "We're almost there," she whispered, her voice soft and steady, trying to mask the storm of emotions raging inside her. She didn't want to overwhelm Emily. She needed to be strong for her now more than ever. "Just a little further, sweetheart." The sunlight streaming through cracks in the barn walls felt like salvation after the suffocating darkness below. Sarah led Emily toward the open doorway where fresh air waited just beyond. As they stepped outside, Emily squinted against the brightness, raising a hand to shield her eyes. The world outside must have seemed impossibly vast to her after so many years confined to that tiny, hidden space. For a moment she froze, overwhelmed by the sheer openness of it all. "It's okay," Sarah murmured, squeezing her hand gently. "You're safe now. We're going home." Emily nodded slowly, though her gaze remained uncertain. She clutched the blanket Sarah had wrapped around her shoulders, pulling it tighter as if it were a shield against the unfamiliar sights and sounds. Birds chirped overhead, leaves rustled in the breeze, and somewhere in the distance a dog barked. All ordinary noises, yet they seemed to startle Emily. Sarah realized then just how much her daughter had missed during those lost years. The simplest things once taken for granted were now foreign and strange. As they approached Sarah's car, Emily hesitated again, glancing back at the barn with a mixture of fear and loathing. He's not here anymore," she said quietly, her voice hoarse from disuse. "He left days ago. I don't know where he went." Sarah swallowed hard, forcing herself to stay calm. Who, honey? Who kept you there? Emily's face crumpled, tears spilling down her cheeks. Grady, she whispered. Old man Grady. He took me, and he locked me away. The name hit Sarah like a punch to the gut. She had suspected as much, but hearing it confirmed made her blood boil. Still, she pushed her anger aside, focusing instead on comforting Emily. It's over now, she said firmly. He won't hurt you again, I promise. Helping Emily into the passenger seat, Sarah fastened the seatbelt carefully, ensuring she was secure before hurrying to the driver's side. As she turned the key in the ignition, her mind raced. They couldn't go straight home. Not yet. Emily needed medical attention, food, rest. Most importantly, she needed protection. Whoever Grady was, wherever he had gone, Sarah knew he couldn't be allowed to roam free. Pulling onto the road, Sarah glanced at Emily, who sat silently staring out the window. Her fingers traced the edge of the blanket, her knuckles white with tension. Do you remember anything about him? Sarah asked gently. Anything that might help us find him? Emily hesitated, her brow furrowing as she tried to piece together fragmented memories. He drove a truck, she said finally, an old blue one. Sometimes he talked about leaving town, heading north. Sarah nodded, committing every detail to memory. Once they reached safety, she would call the police and share everything Emily had told her. Grady wouldn't escape justice, not after what he had done. For now, though, Sarah focused on getting Emily to safety. The drive to the hospital felt endless, each mile stretching longer than the last. But as she glanced at her daughter again, Sarah felt a surge of determination. No matter what lay ahead, she would fight for Emily. Together they would heal, rebuild, and reclaim the life that had been stolen from them. The hospital was a blur of bright lights, bustling nurses, and the sharp scent of antiseptic. As soon as Sarah and Emily arrived, they were ushered into an examination room where doctors and staff surrounded Emily with quiet urgency. For the first time in years, Emily wasn't alone. She had her mother by her side, holding her hand tightly as if afraid she might disappear again. At first, Emily seemed overwhelmed by the attention. She flinched at every touch, recoiling instinctively when a nurse tried to check her vitals or adjust the blanket draped over her shoulders. Her eyes darted around the room, wide and wary, as though expecting danger to follow her even here. But Sarah stayed close, speaking softly to reassure her. It's okay, she repeated over and over. These people are here to help you. You're safe now. Slowly, Emily began to relax, though her grip on Sarah's hand never loosened. The doctors worked methodically, examining her for signs of malnutrition, dehydration, and other injuries sustained during her captivity. They asked gentle questions about how she had survived, what she had eaten, whether she had been hurt. Emily answered hesitantly, her voice barely above a whisper. She spoke of living on scraps of food Grady brought her irregularly, of drinking water from a rusty bucket, of enduring long stretches of darkness when he locked her underground for days at a time. Sarah listened in silence, her heart breaking with every word. How could anyone do this to a child? To her child? Tears streamed down her face, but she forced herself to stay strong for Emily's sake. Her daughter needed her now more than ever, not as a grieving mother, but as a steady presence who could guide her through this nightmare. After hours of tests and evaluations, the doctors finally stepped back, their expressions somber yet hopeful. While Emily was physically weak and emotionally scarred, they assured Sarah that she would recover with time, care, and support. She's incredibly resilient, one doctor said kindly, placing a comforting hand on Sarah's shoulder. With love and patience, she'll get through this. That night, as Emily lay resting in a private room, Sarah sat beside her bed, watching her sleep. Her chest rose and fell steadily, her breathing slow and peaceful for the first time in years. Sarah reached out to brush a strand of hair from Emily's face, her fingers trembling. 10 years of searching, of hoping against hope, had led to this moment. It felt surreal, almost too good to be true, but reality quickly set in. The police arrived early the next morning, eager to speak with Emily about Grady. Sarah hesitated, unsure if her daughter was ready to relive the horrors she had endured. But Emily surprised her. Though visibly shaken, she agreed to share what she knew, determined to ensure no one else suffered the way she had. Sitting in the small interview room, Emily recounted her abduction in halting sentences. She described how Grady had lured her into his truck after school, claiming he'd been sent by Sarah to pick her up. Once inside, he drove far beyond town limits before pulling over and forcing her into the barn. From that day forward, she became a prisoner, hidden away from the world like a ghost. By the end of the interview, authorities had enough information to issue a warrant for Grady's arrest. A statewide manhunt began immediately, with news outlets broadcasting his name and description across the region. Within days, tips poured in, leading investigators to a remote cabin miles away. There, they found Grady hiding under a false identity, unaware that his secret had finally been uncovered. As news of his capture spread, relief washed over Willow Creek. For Sarah, it was a bittersweet victory. Justice would be served, but the scars left behind, both visible and invisible, would take years to heal. Still, she refused to dwell on the past. Instead, she focused on the future, vowing to give Emily the life she deserved. In the weeks that followed, Sarah helped Emily adjust to freedom. Each milestone, a warm meal, a soft bed, a walk outside, was celebrated as a triumph. Together, they began rebuilding their bond, rediscovering the laughter and love that had once defined them. Though the road ahead would be long, Sarah knew they could face it together. After all, they had already overcome the impossible. The trial of Old Man Grady dominated headlines for months, drawing national attention to the quiet town of Willow Creek. Reporters camped outside the courthouse, eager to capture every detail of the case that had shocked a nation. For Sarah and Emily, it was both a relief and a challenge. The legal process forced them to relive the nightmare they had endured, but it also gave them a chance to confront the man who had stolen so much from their lives. Grady sat impassively in the courtroom, his weathered face betraying no emotion, as witnesses recounted his crimes. Neighbors described him as reclusive and strange, while investigators revealed the chilling evidence found in his barn: chains, locks, and remnants of meals meant to sustain a captive. Most damning were Emily's own words, delivered with quiet strength as she testified against her captor. Her voice trembled at times, but she never wavered, determined to ensure he could never harm another child. When the verdict came, guilty on all charges, the courtroom erupted in murmurs of approval. Sarah reached over to clasp Emily's hand, squeezing it gently. Justice had been served, though it couldn't erase the scars left behind. As they left the courthouse, reporters shouted questions, their cameras flashing like strobe lights. But Sarah shielded Emily from the chaos, guiding her toward the car with unwavering protectiveness. "This is just one step," she whispered. "We still have a long way to go." In the months that followed, life began to settle into a new rhythm for Sarah and Emily. They moved into a smaller house closer to town, its cozy rooms filled with sunlight and warmth. It became a sanctuary, a place where they could start fresh without the weight of memories tied to their old home. Sarah decorated Emily's room with care, filling it with soft blankets, colorful curtains, and shelves lined with books and art supplies. Drawing had always been Emily's escape, and Sarah encouraged her to pick up her pencils again, hoping it might help her heal. At first, adjusting to everyday life felt overwhelming for Emily. Simple tasks, like grocery shopping or walking through crowded streets, triggered waves of anxiety. Loud noises startled her, and strangers' stares made her feel exposed. But Sarah remained patient, teaching her coping strategies and celebrating small victories. Each trip to the park, each meal shared at a restaurant, each conversation with a neighbor brought them closer to reclaiming the life they had lost. Sarah also sought professional help for Emily, enrolling her in therapy sessions designed to address trauma and rebuild confidence. At first, Emily resisted, unsure of opening up to someone new. But over time, she grew comfortable with her therapist, finding solace in being able to share her fears and frustrations openly. Slowly but surely, she began to rediscover herself, not just as a survivor but as a young woman with dreams and aspirations. For Sarah, the journey wasn't easy either. She carried guilt for not protecting Emily, even though logic told her there was nothing she could have done differently. Therapy helped her too, allowing her to forgive herself and focus on nurturing their relationship. Together, they attended community events, joined support groups for families affected by similar tragedies, and volunteered to raise awareness about child safety. Their story inspired others, offering hope to those who thought they would never find closure. 1 year after Emily's rescue, Sarah organized a celebration to mark the milestone. Friends, neighbors, and even strangers gathered in their backyard, sharing food, laughter, and stories of resilience. Emily stood beside her mother, holding a sketchbook filled with drawings she had created during her recovery. One picture depicted 2 figures standing under a bright sun holding hands, a representation of their unbreakable bond. As the sun set over Willow Creek, casting golden hues across the sky, Sarah wrapped an arm around Emily's shoulders. "We've come so far," she said softly, "and we'll keep going, together." Emily nodded, leaning into her mother's embrace. Despite everything they had endured, they had emerged stronger, united by love and determination. Though the road ahead would always hold challenges, they faced it with courage, knowing they had already overcome the impossible. And in that moment, surrounded by warmth and light, they finally allowed themselves to believe in a brighter future.